Welcome to Beautiful Journey, a podcast about the inspiring journeys of women from around the world and their successes. I'm Alya Michelson. Today, I want you to meet Ksenia Turkova. I actually met Ksenia back in Moscow years ago, when she was working for a famous independent radio station, Echo of Moscow, which now closed due to censorship. At the time, I was a military correspondent for a different media outlet that was partially state-owned. It's very different to be a journalist in Russia than most other countries in the world. When I immigrated to the United States, staying in media wasn't something I considered at all, for many reasons. Very few people are able to make this transition, but some still try. As the world gets more connected and complicated, I think hearing voices and perspective of people who have lived outside the United States is more essential. Here is Ksenia. Her story begins when she left Moscow, where she was a broadcast star, to open a new radio station in Kyiv.
So first, I moved from Moscow to Kyiv. And the interesting thing is that I moved right before the Revolution of Dignity started. I moved in summer of 2013, and I was thinking I was moving just for a year to launch a new radio station. I moved with some of my colleagues, also from Echo Moskvy or Kommersant FM, Russian radio station. So we just wanted to launch the radio station, News and Talk, and after that, some of us were going to go back to Moscow. But then the revolution started. Maidan, the start of our radio station was postponed, and we were waiting for that, we were practicing, and we were practicing while watching all those events. And when we finally started the radio station, we found out that it turned out to be very, very successful, because before in Ukraine, they almost didn't have any news and talk radio stations. And so people needed the information every day, news, talks, interactions. And so it was very, very successful. And I decided to stay in Ukraine first because I felt responsible for that project, and I wanted to stay to continue it. And second, I just felt like I supported Ukraine in those events, especially after annexation of Crimea and after the war in Donbass started. So I decided to stay, and I spent in Ukraine 4 years till 2017. And in 2016, I went to US for vacation, and it just happened that I got a job offer from Voice of America. I was thinking, because it was a tough decision. I was a single mom with my son, and it was difficult for me to decide to move that far. But finally, I decided to try, and I moved in 2017, and actually, I don't regret. That's how I moved here.
How did you find your voice as a journalist in America? Because journalism is one of the hardest professions to carry on when you immigrate.
Well, I think it's a little bit easier for me because I work for the Russian service of Voice of America. So I work in Russian environment, mixed environment, I would say, Russian, English, and Ukrainian. But it's easier when you move to your native language environment. But I agree that it's difficult to find your voice as a journalist of that country you moved in. And that's what I'm trying to do now, because I just started my YouTube channel in English, and I'm trying to be more American journalist than Russian journalist. Actually, I don't like when people introduce me as a Russian journalist, because I left Russia 10 years ago. So I would say, I don't know, I'm just a journalist with Russian and Ukrainian background.
Do you think there is an interest from American journalists or general public to this?
I think American journalists are very interested in what is going on in Russia, and especially with journalism. And I think they respect those independent Russian media and independent Russian journalists. For example, those ones who had to leave the country recently because of the censorship. And I feel that respect, and I feel the interest. Of course, I think American journalists, they understand what is Russian propaganda. They don't mix it like Russian state media and Russian independent journalists. They distinguish it. And I feel that great respect to those people who still are trying to maintain the level of professional journalism, not in Russia anymore, unfortunately, but for Russia. As I figured out in the last couple years, especially after the events in Belarus, I interviewed a lot of Belarusian journalists, and a lot of them are now out of the country because they can't stay in the country, they will be in prison. So they told me that now you can be a good Belarusian journalist only being outside the country. And I think now it's also the remedy for Russian journalism as well. You can maintain your professional standards only being outside Russia, unfortunately.
It's definitely painful to hear, but I'm very curious about your views on this subject. Do Russians even need journalism? Or propaganda became so powerful that this is the only one thing they can hear and digest?
It depends on what part of the Russian society we are talking about. Because there is a big part of Russian society, unfortunately, that does not need independent journalism and does not need independent information. I just read that according to the recent poll made by Avtsiom, it's a Russian state agency, we understand, we need to keep in mind that it's very difficult to do polls in the autocracies in countries like Russia, especially now during the war. But still, the numbers are like 81% trust Putin, 81% of Russians. So a lot of Russian people, they don't need this information. They just watch, like, let's say, 2 TV channels, and that's it. But there is a big part of Russian society that is against war, and they're trying to protest. And we know that people are being detained, people are being arrested. And of course, those people, they need this information. Luckily, we have internet now. Well, in Russia, it's been difficult nowadays, but still you can find this independent information. And that's why it's so important to have those independent journalists working outside Russia. And actually, I don't think it's something bad because it's COVID showed us the world is like a big village. We're all in one big house and we're just being global. I don't think it's something bad.
Right, right. Well, the interesting thing, is you're saying, there is no more independent hubs, not in Russia, not outside of it, because they were closed down. So all this independent journalism is basically spread down. What we're doing, we have like individual YouTube's channel. So is internet media the future and the only place for it to be?
This and also investigative projects. For example, there was a Russian independent media called Project, project called Project. Now they had a second name, Agency. But they were closed in Russia because they were labeled as an undesirable organization. And when you have this label, it's very dangerous for you to stay in the country because it might be a reason for a criminal case. And so journalists from the project, they moved out of the country, they left the country. The founder of that media, Roman Badanin, he lives here in US, and some of them live in Georgia, in different countries. And they still work as a team, as a very good, one of the best, I would say, Russian-speaking media, investigative media. They even told me that it's easier for them to make the investigations outside Russia because they don't have those restrictions they have inside. And so that's why they could be even more successful.
Right, right. Let's talk about language a little bit because you're also a linguist.
Yes.
I saw that you did several guest lectures about Ukrainian events throughout the perspective of language.
I gave several lectures, yes. Usually I talk about Russian propaganda. I also gave a couple of lectures here in DC, one about Putin's language portrait and another one about Zelensky's language portrait. And Again, it's interesting what kind of questions people ask, because on the last lecture about Zelensky, for example, people asked me what is the difference between Russian language and Ukrainian language, because a lot of people, they don't understand. They think it's something very similar, but they actually don't have enough knowledge about that. And when I told them that the difference between Russian and Ukrainian language is bigger than the difference between Spanish and Portuguese, they were very surprised because they were thinking it's something like Russian. But now Ukraine, as we see, is trying to find its voice. And it's very important to tell people about differences between languages, between different post Soviet countries. So now finally the world starts to know those countries.
How for you personally, life changed after Ukrainian events as Russian American?
I would say that my life changed 8 years ago more than it changed now, because when the annexation of Crimea happened, I lost a lot of friends in Russia, including close friends, like from my childhood. And it was very painful, very, very tough. I also had some issues with my relatives, and it was also difficult. But now I don't think my life, my views, my political views changed or something. It's just maybe my lifestyle changed after February 24th, because I think a lot about Ukraine. I call my friends every day, and Ukraine became a part of my daily routine, I would say. It was not like that before. I mean, after I moved to US, I was thinking about Ukraine definitely, because I spent several years there, happy years, but it was not like weaved into my daily routine. And now Ukraine is like 24 hours of Ukraine. Unfortunately, I see that there is certain Ukraine fatigue now in the world. And as with any war, actually, with any tragedy, and people are getting tired of the news. And I'm trying not to get tired. That's my personal goal, because I'm scared of being tired.
Right, right. Do you have Ukrainian heritage?
No, I don't have any Ukrainian heritage. I did my DNA test, and I have some Ukrainian blood, but a little part. I'm mostly Eastern European, and I have some Northern European part, like Finland and Sweden. So I have some little part of Ukrainian blood. But I fell in love with this country when I moved there.
Do you speak Ukrainian?
Yes, I do speak Ukrainian. I learned language, and I use it almost every day now, by the way, because I take yoga classes with Ukrainian instructor. Languages are my hobby, and I take French classes to maintain my French with the Ukrainian teacher also. And that way I'm trying to, first of all, pursue my hobbies, and second, just to help people, because they need now our moral and financial help.
Did you feel any changes of attitude from Americans after February?
First, a lot of people, they don't know that I'm Russian, for example, because when they asked me before, I told them that I moved from Ukraine. Maybe I mentioned I'm Russian, but it got mixed up in their heads, so they didn't realize I was Russian. For example, a lot of my friends, dance friends, I'm a dancer, and they didn't realize I was Russian. So they were very, very supportive. They knew I moved from Ukraine. I have a lot of friends there. And they all were like texting me and calling me, and were being very, very supportive, our dance community. And by the way, in Ukraine, they have a very strong dance community, swing dance community as well. And some of the swing dance community members in Ukraine, unfortunately, were killed. And yesterday, our friend, a very talented Ukrainian musician, was wounded. So they are all involved in the events. So yes, people were very supportive. And those people who knew that I was Russian, for example, in my son's school, I never experienced any negative reactions from them because I'm Russian. Because I know it's one of the narratives of Russian propaganda now, that Russian people are persecuted abroad and people hate them. Not at all. Actually, exactly the opposite. People, when they know I'm from Russia or from Ukraine, they know that both countries are involved in that war. although one country is the aggressor, they still have a compassion because they understand that I might feel guilt or I might feel responsibility for that, and they have a compassion. So I've never experienced anything negative from the Americans. What I like very much about the United States that people here, and it's a very big difference between, for example, United States and post-Soviet countries, Russia or Ukraine. Here, people are always very respectful to your private life. And I think you know that how in Russia or in Ukraine, they can ask you why you're not still married, or why did you get divorced, or why do you have only one child, and so on. And here, it's impossible to imagine that someone could ask you those questions. So that's what I like a lot. Also, I like how they treat customers. For example, in the stores, the customer is always right. And you can return some item that you didn't like. And I had a lot of negative experience with that, for example, in Russia. And so it was such a great surprise that it's here it's so easy and everybody is being so respectful. What I probably don't like, especially after Ukraine, here they don't have that level of coffee culture as in Ukraine. Because in Ukraine, they have great coffee everywhere. And when I moved here, I saw those like big pots with coffee. And for me, it looked like an insult for coffee. This probably was one of the biggest negative surprises in the United States.
I'm interested in the culture of stereotypes, which, in my opinion, slows down the assimilation for all immigrants. I'm very curious, what stereotypes did you face?
I mostly heard stereotypical jokes like about vodka and about, oh, you're never cold because you're Russian. And this joke is not funny because everybody jokes like that. Also, something about Putin. So people joke about vodka, about being cold, about Putin. What else? About bears, of course. So, I agree that I don't like those stereotypical jokes. If we're talking about like some serious questions and serious stereotypes, first of all, a lot of people are trying to point out my accent. And sometimes I don't like it. I mean, I know I have an accent and I'm not embarrassed that I have an accent. But a lot of people, they're trying like to emphasize it. And a lot of guys were telling me Russian accent is so sexy.
Right.
And for me, it's not a compliment. I don't know how to say it, but for me, it's not a compliment. Also, yeah, I heard about those stereotypes about spies and prostitutes. And I was in a relationship with a guy here before I got married. And he told me that someone told him, don't marry her because she's Russian and she wants your green card. So that was one of the stereotypes. Of course, he like laughed at it, but still, that was said seriously to him. That was given as a serious advice from a friend. Yes.
Right. I saw on your Facebook page that you started taking music lessons and dancing. I just didn't know that about you when I met you in Moscow. Is it something that you carry on from Moscow, or this is something that you developed here that helped you to assimilate better to American culture and find friends?
So as for guitar, I actually was a guitar player since I was a teenager. And I started playing guitar when I was 10. Then I finished the musical school when I was 16 or 17. After that, I played like here and there, but I love guitar. I don't sing because I think I don't have a good ear. So I don't sing, but I like playing guitar. And I have a good technique. I took part in different competitions when I was a teenager. And when I moved here, I just heard about that lady, a great teacher. She moved from Israel. She's a Russian-speaking guitar instructor. And I started taking classes just to refresh all that. And she suggested joining a women's group, like girls group. And we created, actually during pandemic, we created a classical guitar group called Girls and Guitars. First, we played in masks. Now we play without masks. And we just gave our first live concert. It was a small concert just for our friends and families. But it was very nice. And yes, I love it. And it helps me a lot during the war. It helps me with my stress. Also, about dancing, I started dancing in Ukraine, in Kyiv. I just signed up for boogie woogie classes. It's rock and roll. And I loved it. I found a lot of friends there. I also took part in a competition and I took a first place in a beginners group. So that was my love, boogie woogie and rock and roll and jazz, all this. When I moved here, the first thing I did in US, actually, I did two things before I found a place to live. First, I went to the church because church is always a great community to find some connections, some friends. And second, I found a local swing dance community and I wrote an email to them. It was like maybe 2 days after I flew to US.
Right.
And I wrote to them saying, "Hi, I'm Ksenia. I just moved from Ukraine. I'm a boogie woogie dancer and I'm interested in swing dancing." And they were very friendly and they immediately invited me to some party. And I went to that party and I met a lot of people. And now I would say it's like my family here. And we all help each other. And now during the war, swing dancers from DC area, they help swing dancers from Ukraine. We organized a charity event. We collected money for them. So we're all connected.
How are you connected to the Russian-speaking community?
Where I live in Maryland, there is a big Russian community, Russian-speaking community, not Russian, because they are all from different Soviet countries. So from Ukraine, from Kazakhstan, from Armenia, from Georgia, Republic of Georgia. But the Russian community is big and very helpful, very friendly. I would say to my not to my surprise, but it was a good surprise that we're not divided by political views. We all see the situation the same because I heard from different states, from my friends, that some Russian communities are divided. I would say here in Maryland, our communities, I don't feel that we are not divided. And I teach at the Russian school on Saturdays, on weekends. I teach Russian language and literature and journalism. So that's how I connected to the Russian-speaking community. And my son attends that Russian school to maintain his language.
What advice would you give to immigrant women that you wish someone would give to you?
I personally don't like to feel myself like I'm here for some certain amount of time. I'm here until like Putin is dead and then I will go back to Russia. I don't want to plan my life like that. I'm here indefinitely. I live here, and this is my home now. What will happen in the future, we'll see. But now, this is my home indefinitely. So I think when you think that way, it makes your life easier. Because when you are always expecting something, you are always stressed. And maybe this is one of advices. And also, I would advise to, once you moved, immediately try to find a hobby. If you have one, try to keep it, like I did with dancing. It helped me a lot. If you don't have one, try to find one and to be a part of some community. Because my dance community, they helped me with everything. For example, I bought my first car here. I couldn't buy a car, for example. I didn't have enough savings and I didn't have credit cards because I just moved. And also, I was on 1-year visa. So banks just refused to give me a loan. And there was no way for me to buy a car until one of my dance friends sold me her old car. So I'm very thankful. Without my dance community, maybe I would not have found it. So when you have a hobby, it helps you a lot. You don't feel alone.
How do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would say that I am a person who lives in the moment, but at the same time, I like to plan. that my husband always says that you're a great planner, but at the same time, you can be spontaneous. I can combine those things. But yes, I do plan something. I see myself as an international journalist. I want to write more in English. I want to develop my social media. And I don't mean only like English speaking social media. Now we know that Telegram is very popular in Russia and Ukraine. So I'm working on it. I want to develop different social media, try it. And I want to be represented in different languages, most of all now in English and still in Russian, because I think my messages are still important for some Russian audience and in Ukrainian. And I also want to develop as a researcher of media texts. Russian propaganda is very important now, I think, to research what is going on, to study. And also I want to develop as a teacher, as a professor, language professor. I have an idea in the future, not right now, in the future, maybe in several years, to create like a school of post-Soviet languages for people in the US who want to maintain their own languages. I see that now, after what happened to Ukraine, people understood that it's very important to maintain your own language. For example, if you moved from Kazakhstan, it's important to maintain that your kids will maintain Kazakh language. And if you moved from Moldova, it's important to maintain Romanian language and all other languages. Because in Russia, they don't pay a lot of attention to those languages. I mean, local Russian languages. For example, Tatar in Kazan, in Tatarstan. And so that is one of my ideas, to help those languages and help people who want to maintain them.
What, in your opinion, will happen with Russian journalism in the near future?
Inside the country, I think for now there is no future, unfortunately, inside the country. But outside the country, it's getting stronger, in my opinion. It's getting stronger, and there are more and more different media, independent media created, and a lot of young journalists and even former state TV journalists, they want to join now. They want to join independent media after what happened. So I see a big future for Russian journalists outside Russia. But unfortunately, I don't see future right now inside Russia for the journalism.
That was my conversation with Ksenia Turkova, a journalist with Voice of American Youth and a Russian language linguist. You can learn more about Ksenia and hear some of her analysis and lectures on her YouTube channel. You can hear more beautiful journey stories at my website, alyamichelson.org/beautifuljourney, or subscribe to the podcast feed so you don't miss an episode. And if you or someone you know would be a good person for me to talk with, I would love to hear from you. You can find our contact form at alyamichelson.org. This podcast is produced by Emily Generous, Sarah Fay, and Inside Voices Media. I'm Alya Michelson, and thank you for listening.